There's no shortage of critics of the government's new carbon tax and rebate plan. People in Manitoba, Ontario, New Brunswick, and Saskatchewan will pay more at the pumps because of a carbon tax, but are promised an even bigger lump sum payment later in the year. Now, this has all been dismissed as a gimmick and a tax grab by Conservative leaders across the country, but Saskatchewan has led the fight from the very beginning, threatening to take the government to court. What will they do about the new plan? Let's find out. Joining me now is the Premier of Saskatchewan, Scott Moe. Premier, great to have you on the program. The federal government's decided to go over your head, and they say that the additional cost for the average family of four in your province for this carbon tax is $403, but they say the carbon tax rebate will be $598. So they're promising everybody, every family there in Saskatchewan, $195 as a gain. What's your issue with that?
Well, we actually don't accept those facts and figures as per the federal government putting them out. And if there is any factual basis to them, then we would ask where those dollars come from. And are they making the businesses in our communities less competitive? Or are the dollars coming from our recreational facilities, our rinks, or our schools, or our hospitals? You know, where are those additional dollars come from? The fact, again, I reiterate a comment that the previous Premier, Brad Wall, had said a number of years ago. If this is the case, that you're just giving the money back, what's the point in doing it in the first place?
Okay, so two things on that, what the government would say, as we spoke to the Environment Minister earlier. Their argument on the first is that you're paying more at the pumps, but you're getting a lump sum after, so you can change your behavior in order to save money but not hurt the bottom line. It's still, logically, because you're getting the lump sum, is incentivizing you to change your behavior. That's how it's worked in places like British Columbia. What's the problem with that?
That's actually not the case, and that's not the agreements that the federal Minister of Environment is working on right now with Atlantic Canada, where they are forgiving a part of their gas tax for about an equal amount and applying the carbon tax to the gasoline at that point there. So that is not the case across Canada. Again, we say provinces know best when it comes to real emissions reductions and really addressing climate change in our jurisdictions with the most minimal impact on the economies, understanding the diversity in economies and communities across our great nation. Toronto and Montreal are very different than communities in Saskatchewan or Manitoba, and provinces know best. That's what we agreed to at the outset at the Vancouver Declaration, and we continue with that effort. All
right, but Premier Moe, just help me understand this. Andrew Scheer and Stephen Harper, the Conservative Party, they signed on to the Paris Climate Accord. The Liberals have stuck to the Stephen Harper targets of emissions, so they agree on the emissions target. They agree on the dates, the Conservatives and the Liberal, that you have to reduce those emissions. So I'm just trying to figure out, the Liberals have said this is our plan to help us get there. I don't know what the federal Conservative plan is. If Conservatives buy into this, what are your options?
Yeah. Well, with respect to emissions reductions, Saskatchewan has always been part of that conversation. We put forward a Made in Saskatchewan plan that has real reductions and is supported by many of the industries, if not all of the industries here in the province of Saskatchewan. We put forward targets in our electrical generation industry that are beyond the Paris Accord. We have a 40% reduction target there, as well as a methane gas reduction plan here in Saskatchewan. So Saskatchewan most certainly is participating in a big way. It's the Made in Saskatchewan Plan of Prairie Resilience that will actually work here.
Premier, I'm just trying to square the circle here because there's lots of different voices. The Business Council of Canada, which is made up of a group of, as you know, the CEOs of the largest companies in Canada, say they welcome the carbon tax. And I'll just read you what they said. As the most efficient means to contribute to achieving Canada's climate change goals. And they write, these are the CEOs, the Business Council. Importantly, the government's approach recognizes that the money collected through carbon levies needs to go back to businesses and consumers to ensure Canada's economy stays strong. Doesn't that mitigate your concerns when the CEOs are saying that?
A carbon tax does not reduce emissions, and most of the studies, if not all of the studies or comments that I have seen around supporting a carbon tax will very quickly be followed with the removal of all other regulations with respect to the industries that these are being imposed on. You either choose the path of a carbon tax or the path of regulation. You don't have the opportunity to choose both. Most studies that come out will say precisely that, and they will also allude to the fact that in the essence of respecting Canada's competitiveness, that all of the nations in the world should be imposing this tax. That most certainly isn't going to happen. We aren't going to see a carbon tax in the United States, broad-based across China or India anytime soon.
All right, I'm not sure necessarily that collective action means we do nothing unless they do something. But one last question to you. Your province has been, obviously you're taking the federal government to court. The Environment Minister just told me that she believes strongly that this is in the federal government's jurisdiction to impose this carbon tax and rebate. What are you going to do to fight it?
We do have a case before the courts. We would ask the federal government to respect the court's decision in this and allow the time for the courts to make that decision in the same way they did in the case of TMX. The federal government did not run on imposing a carbon tax on the Canadian families across this great nation. They ran on collaborating with provinces to come up with real solutions, of which Saskatchewan has put forward and other provinces have as well. And they also ran on the opportunity for provinces to come up with their own plan. That is what our previous Premier, Premier Wall, signed on to at the Vancouver Declaration, as all other premiers and the Prime Minister signed on to. That's the last document on climate change that has been agreed to across the nation of Canada.
All right, the fight goes on. Premier Scott Moe of Saskatchewan, great to have you on the program, sir. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Evan.